Right. So the topics today, as I mentioned earlier, is quite interesting because we are talking about how do we show the value of enterprise architecture, especially for the C-suite. So C mean or the CEO, CFO, all the at the corporate management level. So why executive today cannot ignore, or in other words, should care about enterprise architecture? Because now I think we are going through quite tremendous pressure in terms of the world that we are living in, because of course of the COVID-19, and of course because of that economy also are very in the challenging phenomenon. So I have with me guest speaker, Dr. Marc. I think this is our second time that we'll be presenting together. So yeah, later he will be taking over after my first few slides to introduce about who we are. Okay, so basically just to introduce about ATD. So some of you maybe already know us. It's our client and you have attended our training. So we do also offer consulting and coaching. And of course, we are located in across Asia Pacific countries. Yeah, so I think our training span across all the architecture specialization, from business architect, information architect, software architect, infrastructure architect, as well as solution architect. So we also offer ITIL and also the COVID, the governance, and also the DevOps. And these are so-called our training path. So our training path comprises of all the so-called supporting skills or competency like DevOps, ITIL, and the COVID governance. Then we have the core in terms of supporting the transformation. So from the business architecture fundamental to architecture core to TOGAF, Archimate, to the TOGAF business architecture, which is recently launched this year, and also business technology strategy as a prerequisite before someone can become so-called or performing the role of business architect, information architect, infrastructure, software, and solution. So I will just leave this slide, and you can contact our team should you interested to attend of any of the training. And these are some of our achievements. I think this is quite notable because in terms of consulting, I think we have just started our consulting arm in the last 7 years. And I think we have achieved quite a tremendous results. And these are some of the results for the Open Group Award in 2018 and 2019. So our client won the top award, and this is at the global international award level. And this year, actually, they're supposed to have the award in Dubai. Sometimes actually October or November, but I think they might postpone it to next year. So 2020, we might not have any award from the Open Group. And in terms of so-called the quality, so these are some of the client that we have done that our deliverable are so-called review by Gartner analyst team itself in terms of the quality compliance with the best practices, whether our EA has so-called deliver value to the organization. And also the way we do things in terms of our framework, our methodology, are all so-called under the surveillance by the Gartner team. So the Gartner itself is not engaged by us, but our client that are engaging the Gartner, which is the Gartner client itself. And this is also something fresh from the oven. This is happening just the last few weeks. So there are only top 10 EA Award 2020 in the world, and 2 of them are our clients. So this is also something quite a major breakthrough in terms of what our capability in delivering enterprise architecture in the real world, and also benchmark with the world best. So this so-called this award proof of our capability and also our ability to execute EA successfully. And the rest, I think, more of our client that we have done in the last 6-7 years. And I think, of course, there are more of that coming soon. So in terms of the digital enterprise architecture, so I just want to highlight that actually addressing quite a number of the key stakeholders in the enterprise. So the first one is actually the head of strategy. This one a very important person, because today I think an organization is successful because they have successfully executed the strategy. So strategy, there are 2 parts. One is to develop a strategy itself. So that one also need to be a very solid strategy. The second one is the execution, right? So enterprise architecture actually helping in both ends. How do we develop the strategy so that we understand the impact on the strategy itself that bring to the organization, as well as the execution? How do you execute the strategy in terms of realizing, of course, now through the digital transformation initiative? So in the past, I think some of you already work or ever engaged a world top consulting company, strategy consulting company that I used to work for them in the past. So typically they only develop a PowerPoint slide. So PowerPoint slide giving you some idea, but unfortunately in the real world today, the PowerPoint slide is can't do anything. It's the static documentation, right? I mean, the most 60, 70 slide, but I can't do anything with the PowerPoint slide. We need something that I can interact. I need to ask the strategy. Show me the impact to my organization. Who are impacted? What technology will support the strategy? So this is where the enterprise architecture are playing a critical role. Then the next one, of course, for the business architect, we need to be able to understand the entire business landscape. That's why today's presentation is about how do we so-called convince the senior management. Because maybe when the senior management heard about the word enterprise architecture, they said, oh, pass it to the IT team. But actually they need to know them. Actually, enterprise architecture is helping them to visualize the enterprise in the much more clearer way that they couldn't do it without enterprise architecture. So this is where you understand about business architecture in terms of the landscape, the processes, function, the services, how is other impact have the impact internally as well as externally. The next one on the chief digital officer. So you're looking at the digitalization. Now I think the word digitalization is everywhere, is common. But how do you know that which are the value stream that you are semi-digital today, fully digital or totally non-digital? You might have the system, but when you have the application system, doesn't mean you have a digital, because digital means it's connected. Are you connected enough? Is there anything that is broken, right, among multiple channel and etc.? That's why for the chief customer officer as well, they need to have some sort of enterprise architecture for them to visualize whether so-called like a moment of life or the value stream, whether they are interconnected, right? So basically, is that there isn't any gap or broken experience for a particular customer. So the customer could be our supplier, could be our client, our consumer, and also perhaps other internal department. Then for the architect itself to do a modeling, right? We need to model the enterprise. We need to define the meta model, the attributes, and we also need to have some sort of a technology portfolio. We need to have the project portfolio. We need to have application portfolio. Basically, the inventorize the whole aspect of the application, project, and technology. And we also need to know their life cycle in terms of the end of support, end of life, as well as solution architect in terms of like we are executing it into the real project. So we need to know to be able to trace from our architecture into the so-called UML design or BPMN notation. We can zoom in and out. And of course, for the investment manager in terms of the technology or project prioritization. So all these need a so-called the capability of enterprise architecture, as well as for the risk officer. Because today in our digital era, cybersecurity is the real threat. So if the thing happen, the threat exists in our environment, how do we classify them? So with the enterprise architecture, we can classify a particular function or processes or application or system, or in fact, a business itself that are impacted by the risk. And of course, for the CIO to have the dashboard to run through all day-to-day operation, IT operation. So this is something quite interesting. This actually last year. Last year predict on the Gartner predict on enterprise architecture in 2019. So Gartner predicted last year that enterprise architecture team act as an internal management consultancy. That's why today's topic is very, very relevant, because what happened is that your senior management need to engage a management consultant, typically outside. Why don't they engage internally? That's why the enterprise architecture team function as an internal management consultant for the organization. Basically, of course, the target audience of the internal management consultant are all the key stakeholders, all at the C-suite, all the CEO, CFO, CMO, and then all at the senior management level. They typically need to know about their strategy, about their capability, about their outcome, and etc. So enterprise architecture should fit nicely. This is based on the last year prediction by Gartner for 2019. And of course, interestingly, Gartner also made a prediction about 6 years ago in 2014. So in 2014, Gartner made a prediction about 10 years for 2025, right? If you can see here in the graph here, Gartner made a prediction on the 7th October 2014. So what is the future of EA in 2025, right? Because Gartner predicted that the organization will have a highly dependency. complex network that you can't just run by putting the people or putting a system. You need to have the architecture platform to give you a map, right? It's like what we are today. We have the GPS. We have the GPS. We can interact with the GPS. You can ask GPS, find me the nearest restaurant. So the same thing with the impact on the architecture itself. So it has a picture something like this: inside out, outside in, and outside out. So these are very, very key. And of course, when Gartner made a prediction in 2014, the world don't know that has COVID-19. So this 2025 actually is today, right? I mean, we can't deny this. And I think looking at the current economic situation, many businesses also will disappear. Some new business will coming up and some getting stronger. So now we have no other option but to transform. So this is the real message. And this is interesting on the Gartner Predict 2020. So Gartner Predict 2020 basically is about now, about this year. So we are ending the year 2020, right? So Gartner made a prediction actually is early this year, sometime I think or end of last year, December, January. So Gartner predict that EA enable the intelligent organization. This is something that is quite so-called interesting, because this one is like, what do you mean by the word intelligent? If someone tell you you are intelligent, what does it mean? They mean you are resourceful, right? You know the source of many information, and you can answer, and you can do analysis. That's why it's an intelligent. So enterprise architecture, according to Gartner, is that it will enable the formation of intelligent organization, because of just now the network of the a digital map itself, right? So you see all the entire interdependency within the organization, and who need this most? It's not the IT team. It's the C-suite that need this most. The senior management need this most. Business need this more than the IT team, to be true. Because the IT team, they know roughly all the application, but the business need to know the entire so-called interdependency, as well as so-called the impact analysis that any decision that they make. So this is quite relevant to the topic that I'm going to share. So without further ado, I think I want to call in Dr. Marc. So he is from the Bizzdesign, and he will be sharing with us on the value of EA for the C-suite. So why executives should care about enterprise architecture? This is something that I have also come across to with many of a client or many enterprises, is that I believe in EA, but how can I convince my board of director to buy in on the EA? This video, this presentation is about, Marc is going to deliver. So I hand over to Marc, please.
Let's first introduce myself to you. Like Will said, I'm Marc Lankhorst with Bizzdesign. My background is in enterprise architecture for many years now, and I have multiple roles within Bizzdesign as a consultant, as a trainer, and in a marketing role as this Chief Technology Evangelist position. If you want to reach out to me afterwards, after the webinar, you can find some contact details in here. Like Will said, we will distribute the slides to you, so you don't need to write this down right now, but just if you want to get in touch. Some of you might know my name from the Archimate standard for architecture modeling. I've led the development of that, and I'm still heavily involved in that. The Open Group standard, that's the standard out there for modeling architectures. Today's webinar will not be about architecture modeling. You might see one or two models, but it's really not about that. It's about EA for the C-suite. A little bit of introduction about Bizzdesign. If you don't know us, we're a software vendor, and we provide a software platform that helps organizations in designing and realizing business change. And architecture is an important part of that, as well as areas like business process management, portfolio management, and other subjects. Just to give you one promotional slide, this is how we are positioned in the Gartner quadrant, way up there. So that was our brief commercial. But today it's really about architecture for executives. How can architects help executives in doing their? I'll have some conclusions and also some tips and advice what to do as an architect if you want to have that role of advisor to senior management. So why is it so hard to convince your executives of the value of EA? And there are a number of issues with that. And one is that it's very difficult to calculate a business case for architecture, because much of the value of architecture is in avoiding bad decisions. not buying that application that didn't fit your landscape, not standardizing those processes that are too different to standardize one single solution. But you can't really calculate that upfront. You can't calculate the value of decisions that were not taken, but you can do it after the fact. You can measure where you prevented those kinds of decisions. So instead of having some sort of upfront calculation, what value architecture adds to the company, maybe you should do that in reverse. Look at it backwards from the perspective of what did you achieve as an architect, where did you make a difference, and how did that contribute? Another aspect might be that architecture is sometimes viewed at a long-term perspective. Of course, it does have a longer-term perspective, but it can also contribute in the short term. Architects have a lot of knowledge about how the bits fit together in your enterprise, and that can be employed in all kinds of ways. And I will show examples of that in the rest of the talk. So it's not just about long-term views when there's a problem in the short term. And some of you might have already been involved in that in the recent disruptive pandemic situation. Many organizations have relied on architects to tell them how different areas depend on each other and what the effects would be of these kinds of disruptions, or what you need to do to facilitate, say, working from home for people, or well, you can imagine all these scenarios. And then finally, of course, architecture is very often seen as a kind of technology management, managing how all these systems fit together, etc. But that is not just everything that architecture contributes. And your digital transformation is not just about employing all kinds of new technology. It's really about what you can do with that technology and how your enterprise can benefit from that. And that line of sight is really what architecture should be about. So between your high-level business goals, your operating models, and indeed, of course, also your IT, but how that all fits together. And there's another problem, and that's the term architecture itself. If you look at the word architecture, it's associated with building and construction. That's where it comes from. And people associate that with engineering and then with IT. They don't see it as a discipline that helps you structure the whole company, the whole enterprise. And that's one of the reasons that at the executive level, people think of architects as chief software builders. And they might have heard of software architecture, but that's a different discipline than enterprise architecture. That is maybe like chief software builders, but it's much more than that, EA. So true enterprise architecture really covers the whole enterprise and not just the technology bits. And then you see over the last years, you see the rise of the business architecture discipline, and that's partly fueled by enterprise architecture being perceived and also being practiced as a kind of enterprise-wide IT architecture. And then let's call it business architecture and get away from that IT notion. But I think that doesn't help. The term architecture is still in there. And that's the problem. People associate that still with IT. And I think a lot of business architects actually have an IT background and still speak in IT terms. So maybe you need to call it differently when talking to the C-suite. And I've got some terms here. And one example I have from a customer of ours, actually in a major government agency, they associate that word architecture also very much with IT. And they've decided to call their business architects actually business developers. That would be really confusing in other organizations, because business development is often associated with sales, marketing, commercial functions. But in their case, they've decided, let's not call it business architects. These people are business developers. Well, whatever works in your organization, you might want to think about this term architecture. So let's focus on these concerns of C-level and how architects can contribute to that. And I've got 5 concerns for you that I want to address. And of course, they will have many more, but these are things that we really see as issues that are top of mind at C-level. And the first is capital allocation, probably the most important one. Where do you want to invest? If there's anything that keeps C-level awake at night, is this. Where do we spend our money? Secondly, what's increasingly important is speed of change, business agility. Large organizations with complex processes and systems are often bogged down by the complexity of what they have, and they need to speed up. Then there's customer centricity. Of course, as a company, you need to be focused on your customers. As a government agency, you need to be focused on your citizens. And the demands and the expectations of your customers get ever higher. So this is a crucial point in competing and serving your customers well. Then there's regulatory compliance. I see many organizations that really struggle with this, and the compliance burden, say in healthcare or in finance, gets ever bigger. That's a real issue as well. And this really could get C-level executives in jail. Literally, if you're not compliant, the biggest consequence could be that. So that's also something that keeps them away. And then finally, and that's, well, we've seen that over the last months as well, operational resilience. How do you deal with all kinds of disruptions? That's crucial, and we've seen how important that is. Maybe some companies were not aware of that, but certainly now everybody knows. So that's the fifth one. And enterprise architecture really helps you get a grip on all of these issues. And I will explain and give examples of how that works for all five of them. So let's start with this capital allocation. And I've put a quote of Warren Buffett here, probably the most famous investor of the last century or so. And he really says that this is the critical responsibility of CEOs, capital allocation decisions, because it has a huge influence on the value of an enterprise. So where do you spend your money? And that basically comes down to two questions. What would be the potential impact of your investment, or maybe cost savings, or talking about where to spend money? And the second is how to weigh that against other uses of that capital. So it's not just about the impact of one investment, it's about the portfolio of investments. And where do you then eventually say put the cutoff when you rank these investments for their benefits and costs? Now, talking about investment impact, that requires a line of sight between every bit involved in the enterprise. So that's well, you can do it bottom up, like here. What does a project add to the world? How does that improve your organization, your capabilities? How does that create value for your customers? And how does that contribute to your strategy? Vice versa, top down, of course, you can start from the strategy perspective, define what capabilities are needed to serve these customers, how you should improve them, where the gaps are, and then define the projects to fit that. Or if you're not a project organization, but let's say in terms of agile value streams, it's the same story. Which agile value streams to fund to really support your strategy? Now, just to put things in some pictures, I've got an example model here that's based on banking world. We've got this Bizzbank demonstration model that I'm using here. And here we're talking about Bizzbank strategy, and they want to be the #1 digital bank, and they see a number of different areas for improvements, like market share and margin, etc. And then they see, investigating these areas, these concerns, that, for example, when we look at market share, they see that their market share is falling in key customer segments because they're challenged by some competitors. They have some other issues as well, but I'm going to focus on the market share bit for now. When they look at what they want to achieve, they want to increase their market share among millennials, because they see that as sort of the customer segment of the future, a lot of growth there. There's a lot of potential. And then they define their main goals and what they want to do. And they want to serve this millennial segment, they need to establish this #1 digital banking user experience, because these millennials are, well, they are digital natives. They need to have a seamless experience. And currently, our example bank, Bizzbank, doesn't really offer that. And now this is just a picture. For those of you that want to see Archimate models, I've added the Archimate notation here as well. So if you're really into Archimate, you can see that this is actually expressed in a model like that. But that's really not the essence of this story. We're just talking about the drivers of the company, what the situation is, the assessments, their goals, and the course of action to achieve those goals. Now, we can look at this from a different perspective and put these same concepts in a different notation, different context. And here we look at the balanced scorecard of the company. And we see different areas like the financial area, the customer area, etc. And we see one of the things from the previous picture appear in here as well, increasing the market share among the millennials. And we can add some metrics to that, and we can see, well, we have these different aspects that we find important, how we measure them, what the target values of these measurements are, what the current state is, the current outcomes, and then initiatives to get the outcome to the target. So there's this digital banking user experience initiative again that we also saw on the previous page. But from a balanced scorecard like this, you will get more of these initiatives. Now we need to link that to the business model of the enterprise. How does it make its money? So talking about different customer segments like these millennials, what are the value propositions they offer? What are their key activities, their key resources? How do they deal with the relationships with customers? different channels, different partners, cost and revenue structure. So this is how they make money. And this is just a small bit of it. If you look at a real life-size business model, it might be more complicated, especially in finance, but it gives a good impression of what you need to address. So focusing again on these millennials as an important customer segment, how are we currently dealing with them? Well, this is another perspective again on how we create value, in this case for specific customer segments. And we see what's called a business outcome journey map. That's a term that's invented by Gartner, I think. Actually, for those of you with a business architecture background, what we see is a kind of value stream capability cross-mapping. So we see a number of capabilities supporting stages in the value creation of the company with certain goals in mind. And we saw these goals also in this, well, first of all, in this analysis of the situation, and then in the balanced scorecard. We see the value propositions from that previous business model. And we see also some perceived value of these capabilities for these different stages. So this gives a high-level overview of how we create value as a bank. Then these capabilities can be organized in the typical business architecture artifact, the capability map. Here we have the capability map of our company, focused on the main sales and operations capabilities. I'm not looking at the supporting ones, and there's strategic capabilities, etc. But these are the main ones that we need to focus on. And we can relate this again to these different strategic goals. And for example, this lime green, that is this increased market share among millennials. So we see which capabilities support which strategic goals. And this is, of course, again, simplified, just showing 3 goals, but you can imagine how this would work out. Then I can go deeper and I can analyze where am I spending my money, where am I investing? And if I look at my different projects and programs and what they deliver in the landscape of my company in terms of, say, improved systems, improved processes, improved customer experience, I can plot where those investments impact my capabilities. And if I plot that, I see that these are highlighted. So these are the impacted capabilities from my set of projects related to that digital experience initiative. And luckily, if I click back, you can see that it is aligned with my increased market share goals. So that's good. But later on, we'll see an example where it's not so well aligned. But you can imagine if you have lots of projects building stuff that doesn't really add any value from a strategic perspective, that maybe that investment would be spent better in different areas of the company. So this is really about that line of sight from where do you invest, where does it impact your strategic improvements. Now you can also look at your projects in a different way. Here I've got an overall project portfolio that covers the entire set of projects. The previous one was just a subset. This is a different view of that. And here, if I zoom in on that portfolio, I can also see what types of projects we have. And in this case, also which application portfolio it impacts. So this is the link between projects and IT investments. And we can see, for example, that a lot of spent on the project category digitize, which is mainly done by the operations application portfolio. So lots of money is spent over there. And also on the innovation side. There's also substantial spending on the governance part, so financial and IT management. And not so much on, say, compliance and reporting software for simplification of the landscape. Of course, you can imagine that's not really an area where you spend a lot. But you get an idea of how to spend, where to spend your money. And this could be a starting point for allocation of investments and not just for reporting. You can say, well, we want to allocate our budgets across a matrix like this. We want to spend so much on digitizing the operations, this much on innovating, this much on, say, governance and compliance, instead of being driven by the events of the day or people with the loudest voices dominating the portfolio board. This gives you a much more balanced approach to that. And then you can trace back, basically trace back my previous slides to see what the impact of these projects is on your strategy and how the company benefits from that. So that was the first bit. The capital allocation, maybe the most complicated even, also for architects to support, because the analysis is complicated, the decisions are high impact, really important. Second bit is about agility. And this is the quote that everybody uses from Darwin. It's about being adaptable. And of course, that's true for companies as well. You need to adapt to the environment. And that, I think there's a main misunderstanding about agility, and that is just about software building. We have an agile software factory. We're agile. That's really not enough. That's just the first bit. That's process agility, agility in your development processes. That's doing agile, using Scrum, etc. But equally important is system agility. The stuff that you build should also be agile, because if you pour concrete in a very agile way, the end result is still not going to be flexible. So having very complex systems as a result of an agile process still doesn't help you. And together then, process and system agility can support business agility. And there you can really use your agility as a competitive instrument, being faster than your competitors in the market. So you need process agility and system agility, and agile is not just doing Scrum. That's really a misunderstanding. Maybe the term has been, let's say, contaminated a bit too much by the software world, and we should use something else. And within Bizzdesign, we're often talking about adaptive enterprises rather than agile enterprises, just to get away from that word agile. So maybe that's something you could think about as well. Now, process agility, of course, we know about that in the world of agile development. We used to do things in a waterfall manner, just throwing stuff over the wall. Nowadays, it's much more about collaboration, and architects play a role in that. Architects are, well, one of the crucial disciplines to support this iterative development, and they are no longer just, let's say, a hurdle in the process. They are one of the team. If you do it in the right way, it's really being a team member and supporting whatever is being developed in an agile way. And I've seen this also used in, let's say, product development, business development, not just in software development. The agile way of working can support all these other outcomes as well. But the main thing is, it's not just one step in a long waterfall. It's really a feedback loop and a collaborative activity. So that was process agility. But system agility, that's really about the value of architecture in preventing unnecessary complexity, in reducing that, in simplifying things, to speed up change, to become more agile. And if you look at this picture, it's from Philip Clifton. He's quite famous in software architecture, but it also applies to enterprise architecture. The positive and negative value of what is developed is, well, it's visible. You can the visible stuff, that's easy to see. You have features that have positive value and bugs that have negative value. But there's also a lot of invisible stuff. The architecture is actually the positively valued invisible stuff that you're creating, and the technical debt or the architecture debt, that's the negative value. That's the stuff that you need to resolve eventually. So, for example, unwanted complexity is in this black square, and architecture can help you get out of that, can help prevent that, can help resolve that, and that speeds up change. If you don't do architecture, just build features, you can imagine that your software eventually will be a heap of unmanageable, and you're not flexible anymore. And the same is true for your processes. If you just let processes run amok, basically, then you get the same issue. You do need to keep an eye out on the structure of things. And that's really to avoid unwanted complexity. And that's the main issue that organizations struggle with, that feel that they are not agile. Everything connected to everything else, all these dependencies. And you can imagine what happens if you make a change. You need to know where the dependencies are. You need to do these changes. That's a lot of work. You need to be aware of potential side effects. So you do need to do a lot of testing. And even then, you might find after the fact that you forgot a case and something pops up based on all these dependencies. So architects need to keep track of those dependencies and reduce them if possible, or at least manage them. And I see a lot of work being done nowadays in things like microservices. And if you don't architect those well, you'll end up with the same complexity, but now between the services rather than hidden inside that big monolith you're replacing. So architecture is really important to keep track of these complexities, keep reducing dependencies, and really organize things differently. So architecting for agility is really about helping your organization create stuff that's easy to change. So reducing the complexity. And you don't want to have all these individual agile teams building in a little agile silos, maybe these microservices, and then indiscriminately connecting to all kinds of other services, just creating more of a mess. One way of doing this, and there's a lot more to be said about that, and I've given webinars on this in the past as well, but one way of becoming more agile as a company is organizing the architecture around autonomous business capabilities. If they are responsible for their own, let's say, full stack from business, so the services they provide as a business entity down to their processes and technology, if they have the flexibility to change within that specific part, that makes life a lot easier. But there's a lot more to be said about that. But this is one of the important contributions of enterprise architecture, really, agility in a broad sense. Then customer centricity, another area that's quite important. As well, Sam Walton said, there's only one boss, and that's the customer. So you really need to put your customer at the center of what you're doing. How do you do that? And that's, again, something that architecture can really contribute to. This single face to the customer, joining up all these parts of the enterprise, that is really what architecture does. It's really the discipline that knows about these dependencies and can help create that single face. Now, talking about faces, customer journey maps are one way of expressing this face to the customer, and we're even using smiley faces down below. Here we see our BizBank example again. Here we see a customer journey in the current state, and it's not so great. This is for online payments, and the customer has to go through 3 different channels, and it's quite complicated. And well, you can imagine if you have to do that with SMS verification, if you want to know if your payment was actually completed, you have to call the call center. This is horrible. And you can see that from the faces down here. The customers are not very happy with that. So our example bank has decided, let's change this. We're going to do this in our mobile app, and happy faces all along. Well, of course, this is what they want. Maybe they won't get that, but you know how it is with people in marketing. They're always optimistic. But this is the idea: customer journeys as a way of starting, as a starting point for this discussion on the customer. Now, if I look at these different touch points, these blue circles in here, I can also project those on my capability map from my previous slide. Which of these customer touch points are supported by which capabilities? And well, I have this colored view of that, so I can see where the impact of that is. If I then look at my investment focus again, I can see that we're not always investing in the important bits from a customer perspective. Take, for example, say this customer case capability. Actually, we're not really doing anything with that in terms of investment. So this is where we're not really aligned. So you might be aligned on some of your strategic goals, but not apparently not exactly from the perspective of the customer. So this kind of analysis again helps you to decide where to put your money. Then we have regulatory compliance as a main issue. This is really getting, for many companies now, it's getting a bit too much. I see organizations that spend over half their change budget just on compliance, especially in finance. I see lots of effort spent on all these know your customer projects, for example, all these compliance projects on processes that you really have to map them all out, state what the controls are, where the risks are, etc. And that's just a major effort. Data, also a big issue. GDPR, you might know about, personal data, privacy sensitive data, how to deal with that. Well, it could get you into jail even in some cases, but the fines of 4% of your turnover are scary enough for companies, so they know they have to deal with personal data in a good way. How do you do that? Again, this is across your whole enterprise. It's not just an IT issue. It's about your processes, it's about your people, about the roles in the organization, about external partners using data. Who has that overview? Typically, it's again about architecture. How do these bits fit together? Now, just to give you one example of a kind of analysis you could do with that, say we're talking about this privacy issue on data. You need to classify your data then with the appropriate attributes, and then you can use your models to see where that data is used, how it flows through the landscape, the IT landscape, the business landscape, which locations, say geographical locations, some data cannot leave the EU, for example. Who is processing it? Do you have agreements with these processors? What kind of purposes is the data used for? Is that proportional to the data you're using? for example, highly sensitive personal data, say healthcare data, you can only use for very, very specific purposes. If that's, well, sometimes even just if it's laid down in law, otherwise you're not allowed to have that data. Now, a little bit of Archimate again, a little model here. We see some data objects and some security domains. And here we see how that data is transferred between applications and who are using these applications. Very simple model, but it's just to demonstrate things. Now, suppose you assign security levels to these different domains. You can propagate those to your architecture. And here we see a slightly niftier example where it's about insurance. We see an insurance claim that's part of two different security domains. It's in the privacy sensitive data, so it's classified as highly sensitive, level 3. For financial data, it would have been level 2, but this analysis takes the worst case and says, "Ooh, this is very sensitive data." And then we see that data is exchanged between systems here. And because the CRM and financial systems both have access to that customer profile, because it is exchanged between them, these turn red as well. They have to be protected just as well as that data. And that then propagates to the users of these applications. They need to be maybe to be vetted before they can touch these applications. And of course, you need to have security measures in place, etc., etc. So based on a classification of your data, you can propagate that information through your whole architecture to make these analyses, whether you're compliant with applicable regulation. And this is just one example focused on data protection, but there might be, well, you can imagine all kinds of other scenarios where you can use your architecture to ensure compliance. Here we have an overview. The previous one was just a detailed analysis. This is an overview, a risk and control dashboard, where you can say, where your chief risk officer could have a look at what are my risks, what are the controls that are in place. And this is a very simple one, but we have other kinds as well, where you can just see which controls are covered by, which risks are covered by which controls. Do you have the measures in place or not? You can do all kinds of analyses on that. Again, relating things to your architecture, and then also using that to decide on where to spend your money in being compliant. Blanket measures are often quite expensive, but if you can focus based on these analyses, you might spend your money more wisely. And then finally, operational resilience. Yeah, well, we've had some issues over the last months or so with pandemics, but there's more to it than just that. All kinds of disruptions can happen. Cyber criminality has been a big issue over the last years, and say ransomware, we've seen some major attacks. But also, well, the economy, let's see what's going to happen in the next months. That might hit companies pretty hard. And I mentioned these blanket measures also in the context of risk and security, and the same holds here. If you want to, well, basically protect everything at the same level, that's really expensive, and that might not be necessary either. It might be better to spend the money where the risks are higher. So you really need to be aware of that and analyze that. And that relates to that discussion on business agility. You also need to be flexible. You don't know what's going to happen. So resilience is not about just protecting yourself against the known threats. It's also about the unknown, the things you don't know yet, but you need to be flexible enough to respond to that. So that relates to being agile, being flexible, having multiple options. And that's, again, an architecture issue. It's really, again, about understanding dependencies. Being resilient also means reducing those dependencies. That not everything fails if, say, somebody pulls a power plug. Just standard measures. But you can imagine that this can be quite complicated in larger enterprises. So supporting management decisions on that, it's really about defining scenarios to evaluate your resilience, creating appropriate dashboards to visualize them, then maybe using portfolio management to decide on investments. So having a portfolio of measures you could take, what they cost, what benefits they have, and then ranking them, and again, deciding based on that ranking where you really want to invest. It comes back to that capital allocation again. So it's an integrated picture, and I've now presented these different concerns of C-level in different ways, but actually it's all about that integrated picture. We're talking about improvement and change in an integrated way. So that really it all comes together. And you saw that with well, risk versus agility versus capital allocation. All these things are interlinked. So that's yet another reason to take an architectural perspective on this. Now here we see a dashboard that combines a few of these things. This is an operational dashboard. It's really from an operations department. And we see, if you look really closely, we see customer satisfaction metrics on the one hand, and we see some system errors on the other. Well, there might be a correlation there. Customers being dissatisfied if a certain website fails often, for example. So correlations across these different areas are also quite important. Another perspective on that is this one, looking at the application portfolio and the business criticality of your applications. And here we have the overall portfolio, and this is from a well, for a regional part of basically the previous picture. And here we see everything. But if we now want to zoom in just on the business critical applications, I can just basically select this criticality high over here in the bottom left picture, and then I just see the highly critical ones. It just drills down to that level, and this is then again a basis for decision making on what do I need to do? Where do I need to invest in improving, say, the security of these systems, the resilience specifically of these critical systems located, well, in this case in the Netherlands. This is what we spend on them. This is their business and technical value. So these kinds of integrated views really help you as a manager decide on where to invest, where to improve, and where investment might not be needed. This is yet another picture, again, highlighting information about, in this case, your application landscape, and this is about lifecycle management. And we see two kinds of life cycles here. The red, amber, green ones, those are about life cycles that are internally defined by the company, and the bluish ones are the vendor life cycles of certain products. So you could see in, don't look at the names of the applications, we fake that because we don't want to use actual data here. But you can see an example here that the first one goes end of life around here, but it is still in the deployment phase within the company lifecycle. So you can see you're running pretty big risks here because you're running an application that's end of life according to the vendor. Suppose you have something still running on Windows XP. Well, that wouldn't be very safe, right? So this is also a basis for risk analysis and analyzing and addressing resilience in that sense. So aligning your application life cycles, maybe with other life cycles in your company, and certainly also with life cycles of vendors, using that as a basis for risk analysis, a basis for investment, maybe in replacing outdated applications. Again, this is really about decision making, not about architectural design in the classical sense, but it's really about using architecture information, seeing what, say, would happen if you want to replace that application, what will be the impact of that change, what's the cost of that, what's the benefit in terms of reducing that risk. Again, the full perspective. That's an overview of 5 common concerns that executives have and how architecture could help with that. And we've only got, well, say 45 minutes, so it's not something you can address in that short time frame in detail. But you get an idea of how you could help as an architect in supporting these kinds of concerns. And in essence, it's really about making the bits fit together. It's not about building big systems. Of course, a part of architecture is concerned with that, but it's really about managing this coherence. You want to move in one direction as an enterprise and not have all the bits fly around in different ways. You have to be adaptive and make sure that your organization is adapted to that ecosystem and does serve the customer's needs. You need to reduce the complexity to speed up the change of the organization. All these internal and external constraints, the whole compliance discussion, where does that impact? How am I ensuring that compliance? And then spending your money where it counts, given all these subjects above, that's really what architecture supports. And that really then lays the foundation for business growth and innovation. It's really about making sure that in the next years as a company, you can grow, you can innovate, it's easy to change, you have protected yourself well, you are compliant with regulation, you do serve your customers in the way that they want. That's really what architecture can support. Now, this is the storyline. It's not always easy to really get this, let's say, sold to C-level. So what do you need to do as an architect? Well, first of all, what I often see is that architects are swamped by work that the organization has for them. Can you give me this report? How are these systems connected? What's the risk over there? There's always more work to do. But that means that you're always on the defense. You're always just waiting for what, well, usually not waiting because you're busy, but there's work coming at you and you just have to swat at all these flies that want something from you. Sometimes you have to say no. You just have to make room for other work that's also important from that more strategic perspective. So you have to prioritize, and sometimes you do need to say, sorry, I don't have time for that. There's other work that has a higher priority. And taking some of the time to show value to management in the ways I've shown and in other ways is quite important to improve your own position as an architect within your organization. And the most successful architecture teams that I've seen in our customer base really have this attitude. Let's go to management, show them what we can do for them. Let's create some examples. We know they're struggling with this and that issue. They haven't asked us yet for help, but we know that we can add value. Do that proactively. That's quite important. If you just sit and wait, that's well, they're not going to come to you if they don't know what value you can bring. Secondly, what also helps is to join forces with other groups in the organization. For example, with your PMO or security teams or finance or the governance and compliance people or IT service management, and there are many more. Often the structure that EA offers, the structural view of things, added to the perspective of these different departments, is really more than just the sum of its parts. Some years ago, I gave a course on architecture for non-architects at a customer of ours, and we had people from their IT service department, and they didn't know that we had these overviews as architects of how these applications were connected, and they could really fruitfully use that to do, say, tracing of faults. They at that time, they just had to call their colleague that was responsible for that other system that they were connected to, but they didn't know that there was all sorts of stuff behind that other system. When we gave them these overviews, they were really happy about that. And this is a very simple example, but having that integrated view is really what it's all about. So then the final bit, the final slide, is about engaging with management. One thing that I noticed is that architects often have, let's say, a scientific kind of background where you start with your premises, your axioms in a sense, and you reason towards a conclusion. That's not what management wants to hear. They want to start with the answers, and then you might provide the substance behind it if they have time for that. But start with the answers to their concerns and use the appropriate artifacts. Usually management is not really interested in large current state blueprints. You might need them for other work, but they need to have artifacts that say provide analyses and dashboards to guide their decisions on the future, where they want to go. And that could be just the outcome of an analysis of, say, a current state or a future state blueprint, but it's really the result rather than what's going on behind the scenes. And this is also one reason why models are much more valuable than just pictures. If you do, say, a big blueprint in Visio or in PowerPoint, you can't do anything with it. You can't do these calculations, these analyses, create these dashboards. It's really important to have true models there that you can calculate, analyze, transform, whatever. You can manipulate them in all sorts of ways to create these outputs for your management. And then finally, it's really about communication. You have to actively communicate the value of architecture, what you can contribute, show the results, promote what you're doing, and not just wait till they come to you. It's really go out there, be proactive, communicate to everybody around. That's the final slide with content I wanted to show you. I have one slide with some links that are potentially relevant, some other white papers and stuff we've written in the past. In the area of C-level support, there's much more on our website, but I just wanted to mention these, and you get the slides, so you can just click on the links from there.
Great. Thank you so much for the sharing. Thank you, everyone, and stay safe. Bye.